Hello, this audio is Sentence Structure Part 2. The objectives of this audio is to review what you learned in Sentence Structure Part 1 audio, but also to discuss the different parts of a sentence, the subject and the predicate, compound subject, compound verb. We're going to talk about clauses, both the independent clause and a dependent clause, and what makes a run-on sentence. So to review what you learned in Sentence Structure Part 1, a sentence is a group of words that express a complete thought. A sentence fragment is a group of words that does not express a complete thought. A declarative sentence states a fact. It ends with a period. An interrogative sentence asks a question. It ends with a question mark. An exclamatory sentence expresses a strong emotion such as surprise or disbelief. It ends with an exclamation point. An imperative sentence makes a request or gives a command. It usually ends with a period, but may end with an exclamation point. Parts of a sentence. So, a sentence needs a subject and a predicate. They're the two most basic parts of the sentence. Remember, we talked in Sentence Structure Part 1 that you have to have a subject, a verb, and a complete thought to be a sentence. All sentences will have a subject and a predicate. The subject is a noun or a pronoun, and the predicate will contain the verb. So a little bit more about the subject. The subject tells what the sentence is about. It may be one word or it could be a group of words. The subject is a noun, which is a person, place, or a thing. The most important word of the subject is the simple subject. The other words in the subject are there to give more information about the subject. The predicate. The predicate describes something that the subject is or does. The most important word in the predicate is the verb. And remember that a verb is a word that expresses an action or a state of being. So I want you to look at this sentence. My older brother Tim once worked as a mechanic. When you look at this sentence, can you identify the entire subject and can you identify the predicate? Take a moment and think about it. What is this sentence about? Who is this sentence about? Then what you would want to do is make a mental note of the words that actually tell what this sentence is about, or give a little bit more information about who this sentence is about. So what I've done here is in red, I've made the subject red and I've made the predicate blue. So as you look at it, you could see that the entire subject is a group of words. My older brother Tim. Now the simple subject is about Tim. I don't need the words my older brother, but they do give more information about who Tim is. So Tim is the simple subject. What did he do? Well, he worked. Worked is the verb. It is the most important word in the predicate, which is once worked as a mechanic. Now look at this sentence. It's a little bit more straightforward. She enjoys cutting hair. So when you look at this, can you tell who is the subject? In this case, it's a pronoun, she. She enjoys cutting hair. So when you look at this, she is the subject, and enjoys cutting hair is the predicate. Enjoys is the verb. It tells what she is doing. So look at this one. Tammy went to school. Can you identify who the sentence is about and what she did? Well, Tammy is the subject and went to school is the predicate. Went is the main word in the predicate because it's the verb. It tells what Tammy did. She went to school. Sometimes you'll have a compound subject. A compound subject is where two or more nouns work together as the subject. The subjects are joined together by and or the word or. So an example here is Tim, Jim, and Pam went skiing. Look at the sentence. Who is the sentence about? Well, it's about three people, Tim, Jim, and Pam. They're connected by the word and what did they do? They went skiing. So went skiing is the predicate, and the most important word of the predicate is the verb, which I've underlined is went. Tim, Jim, and Pam went skiing. Tammy and Kim went to the mall. So again, we have a compound subject. It is Tammy and Kim. They went to the mall. So went to the mall is the predicate, and went is the main verb in the predicate. A compound verb is where two or more verbs work together to describe what the subject does. The verbs are joined by and or the word or. Clauses. A clause is a group of words that include both a subject and a verb. The two types of clauses are independent clauses and dependent clauses. An independent clause is a complete thought. It has a subject and a verb. So we talked about this in sentence structure part 1, that you need 3 elements to be a sentence. An independent clause has those 3 elements. It's a complete thought, and it contains the subject and a verb. An independent clause can stand on its own as a sentence. This is called a simple sentence. Note, there are rules that must be followed if you connect 2 independent clauses, and we're going to talk more about this when we talk about punctuation. But for now, what you need to know is if you have 2 independent clauses, you can join those 2 independent clauses by a semicolon to make what we call a compound sentence, or you can join those independent clauses with a coordinating conjunction. And typically the most common conjunctions are and, or, and but. And we're going to talk more about those coordinating conjunctions too, in a way that you can memorize the coordinating conjunctions. Dependent clause. A dependent clause cannot stand alone in a sentence because it does not express a complete thought. So we talked about this in sentence structure part 1, that you need to have all 3 elements to be a complete sentence. A complete thought, a noun, which is the subject, and the verb. Well, in a dependent clause, you may have a noun and you may have a verb, but if it's not a complete thought, then it's a dependent clause, which we consider also a sentence fragment. So a dependent clause will then depend on an independent clause to make it a complete sentence. So if you were to start a sentence with a dependent clause, you would probably set it off with a comma, and then you'd have your independent clause follow that. A dependent clause may also be called a subordinate clause. So when you're studying on your own, if you do any research on your own, you might read that it's called a dependent clause. You might read that it's called a subordinate clause. A subordinate clause usually begins with a subordinating conjunction, and there's a list of subordinating conjunctions. Examples of subordinating conjunctions are if, after, because, since, although, when, until. Run-on sentence. What makes a run-on sentence? Well, a lot of people think that a run-on sentence is when a sentence is too long, but in fact, it has nothing to do with the length of the sentence. A run-on sentence is 2 or more independent clauses that are joined only by a comma with no coordinating conjunction or nothing at all. So, If you had two independent clauses and you simply put a comma between them, well, that would be a run-on sentence. And so to fix that, you would want to put a semicolon there instead, or you'd want to use the comma with a coordinating conjunction. So to review, an independent clause, a main clause is a complete thought and has a subject and a verb. An independent clause can stand on its own as a sentence, and this is called a simple sentence. A dependent clause, a subjective clause, cannot stand alone in a sentence because it does not express a complete thought. It is a sentence fragment. A dependent clause depends on the independent clause to be a complete sentence. And lastly, a run-on sentence is two or more independent clauses that are joined only by a comma, no coordinating conjunction, or nothing at all. Thank you. Email me if you have any questions.